Hello, everyone. Before I start, I want to thank and recognize Maddie for all the hard work he put into curating, arguably, the smartest set of entities in our universe for the 2022 Hex Conference. It's a lot of work bringing 80 people together, so make sure we all thank Maddie. Now, certainly a statement of thanks is incomplete without mentioning the brilliant designer of Hex, Richard Hart, without whom none of us would be together, and without whom many lives would not be changed for the better. So thank you very much, Richard Hart. Finally, I include a thanks to the supportive and knowledgeable Hex community at large, and in particular to Dev Kyle, who has graciously shared his knowledge and wisdom and time with me. He's always 20 steps ahead of me and always humble about it and on Team Hex, so that's great. We're lucky to have all three of them as part of our community. And that concludes the thanks portion of my talk. I know that audiences tend to lose focus during the thanks portions of talks, so this statement is intended to give the audience a chance to refocus and get comfortable, because after a few probably not funny slides, I will tell you what I promised to deliver by the end of this talk. So, just trying my hand at comedy here, initiating comedy at the moment. This is just a little joke about what I'm seeing throughout some of the chats lately. There's a lot of just 2-letter statements, and that's about it. So that's the end of the comedy session for now. So by the end of this talk, I promise that you'll know about some of my recent activities in the community. You'll be more formally exposed to the notion of bridging. You'll take away a really important thing about why you want to use our bridge. It's going to avoid some headache and some additional costs down the road for you. You'll witness some important architectural constraints that a good bridge satisfies. And by virtue of being a Hexagon, you'll feel empowered. You'll know which audited code we're using for the community bridge. The auditors are the same ones who are auditing, I believe, the pulse chain itself and who have audited Hex itself. And we all know how Hex has turned out so far. You'll also learn about vampire attacks. You'll know what they are. And you'll know why you can think of the vampire executing the vampire attacks, who we'll call Dragula, as having 3 fangs. I'll show you some patterns. This won't be an exhaustive list of patterns, but it'll be sufficient for you to get an idea. And I'll offload some of those patterns and some additional bridge stuff onto some Quant Gang episodes, if Maddie will have me, on a little segment that I'll call Vampire Bites or Bridge Bites. And all the relevant links will be attached. So that's what you can expect to know by the end of the talk. At the Hex Conference, the goal is to keep things light and accessible. And of course, we want to have a spotlight on community activity. So one of my goals is to limit complexity. I might not do the best job of that, but I hope to do a good job of that. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of my activities in the community. Normally, I'm involved in things that are not related to the bridge. But lately, I have been involved in bridge-related stuff, which is in the category of cross-chain communication, which is a subcategory of making blockchains operate with each other. So a question that comes up naturally is, why did you get involved with the bridge in particular? And to understand why, I'm going to define a few terms. So I'll refer to humans as a composition of developers and users. And I'll define a bridge at a high level, so we're on the same page of what the pieces are and how one would use a bridge in general. We're not going to get too in depth about what's happening. So some network terminology. We have a foreign chain. You can think of this chain as Ethereum. And on the foreign chain, transactions are expensive. Now, we also have a home chain, and you can think of this home chain as Pulse chain. And in general, transactions on this chain are inexpensive. And on these chains, there are contracts, and in between the contracts are humans. So a human, to use a bridge in general, would go to a URL. They would choose the asset that they want to send. I'll get into this terminology of send in a moment. They would choose the amount that they want to send. And this sending process would actually be, you could think of it as a send. And if you want to think of it as a send, awesome, great. That's totally okay. For tax purposes, my slides are getting away from me weirdly. For tax purposes, you might want to think of the send as a lock and mint. Now, certainly this is not financial or tax or any advice. I eat glue. As a lock and mint, and really as a value projection. So you're not really selling your coins or anything like that. You are projecting, as one would, a shadow onto a wall, what your coin represents. So actually a representation of your coin, to be more specific. And once that representation is there, then you can do stuff on the home chain, on Pulse chain, or you can have like a shadow puppet play or a shadow puppet battle or something like that. So without being able to project value from one chain to another, you inhibit your ability to put economic energy onto the Pulse chain, which is a critical element of the success of the Pulse chain, right? Like if we suppose that there was no bridge, then the only way to on-ramp value would be through some kind of fiat on-ramp, some form of centralized exchange. And, if something does not, if something like that does not exist, then you're going to have a bad time. I don't have a South Park meme, but it would be placed, it would be appropriate to place it here. So the community came up with the solution. It's audited. It's a solid solution, and I'll get into some of its components a little bit later. And I want to really talk about a critical takeaway of the solution rather than getting into the details of the solution. With every bridge can be thought of as, if we want to go back to this shadow puppet analogy, every bridge uses a slightly different flashlight. So every shadow will be darker or lighter. And if you're sending coins over the bridge, I'm so sorry, my slides are doing something weird. They're skipping one step, so I'll just have to deal with that. But anyway, sorry for that diversion. So if you're using 100 different bridges, then you're going to have 100 different pools of hex, and you're going to have wildly different prices. The user experience is going to suck. So it's a good thing for you as a user to use one bridge. So this comment here is accurate. They all create slightly different token projections onto the home chain, onto the pulse chain, and you're going to have a bad time. So from that idea, you can infer that liquidity pools benefit from network effects, and that's accurate. They really, really do. So another part of this talk is going to be about vampire attacks. And we're going to define what they are a little bit later. So now that you know why I decided to get involved and why I thought bridging was critical, especially in the case of potentially not having a fiat on-ramp, and potentially existing on a chain without any bridges, a natural question is, how did I get involved? And it's kind of an interesting and fun story. So I was watching a live stream shortly after the Pulse Chain sacrifice had ended, had officially ended, that is. And Richard put out a kind of a call to action for battle-tested, audited bridge code without any admin keys. Turns out it's a hard problem. It's actually a really hard problem. There's no solutions in production right now, and solutions are far away. And if you care about counterparty risk, you kind of want a solution to this. So I thought to myself, like, I'm sometimes not dumb. Earlier in the day is usually better. So maybe I can contribute. And I decided to send Richard Hart a message in DMs. And I asked him to put me into the bridge group so that I could contribute. And I described this to Matty ALLin. And he called it the put me in coach moment. And I definitely agree with that. I would say this is 100% an accurate dramatization of the the impact that I thought I would have. This is more appropriate, a more appropriate description of reality. So I went into this. Let's call it this bridge exploration with a mindset of it being okay to be perceived as not super knowledgeable in the space. I have a good foundation in the space, but the space is complicated. So really good quote from a Stoic philosopher that you should keep in mind if you want to try something new. Sometimes it's okay to look dumb. So at first I picked up these two books. I thought that they would cover everything that I needed to know. Sadly, I was wrong. They do not cover everything. but there were some really powerful ideas in Richard Hart's book Sci-Fi that had very high utility when it came to me having some degree of impact on our little quest for a bridge without admin keys. So there was an idea in Sci-Fi. I'm so sorry for the slides continuing to just switch over. I suspect they're on a timer, and I don't want to mess around with settings, and I don't want to risk leaking anything. So we're just going to have to deal with that for now. So there's an idea in Sci-Fi where there's really a small amount of knowledge that you need to be really effective. So I had recently read that part of the book, and I had targeted myself towards figuring out the smallest amount of knowledge necessary to determine what makes a bridge good. And so part of the goal of my presentation is to empower Hexicans with my story. There was really a lot of fumbling around in the space, but by showing you how I got the knowledge that I did, maybe you'll be able to help in the future. Maybe community members will be able to help in the future with whatever skills or talents or backgrounds that they have that might be amenable to whatever situation we happen to be in. You know, maybe you have some financial experience, et cetera, et cetera. So we benefited a lot from this idea, or at least I did. I became very effective at rejecting certain projects because they failed to meet certain criteria. And eventually, the group that came together started to benefit from another idea in Sci-Fi, which is this idea of the synergy that emerges from groups that have a shared interest. So, and in fact, this applies to Hexicans as well. We have a shared interest, and synergy emerges. And this conference is an example of that. And this conference is one way to empower Hexicans. Our stories are another. Ideas in Sci-Fi are another. And we're probably going to find many additional ideas in the future. So I'm going to tell you how I 0 to 1 myself. And by 0 to 1, I just mean the minimal knowledge and skills necessary to be effective. So I started very ignorant in the space and cringe as well. And after a lot of continuous ingestion of energy drinks and caffeine, let's call it, I became more effective and less ignorant. So my first goal was to determine exactly what the definition of battle-tested was. I had an idea, but I just wanted to be sure. So certainly something can't be battle-tested without it being in the wild for a long time. And it would certainly have to have a lot of uptime as well. You could release the code, but if it doesn't work 99% of the time, then it doesn't really matter, does it? That it's been in the wild for a long time. Additionally, if the prior two constraints are satisfied, but there's no money on it and nobody really cares, right? Nobody's paying attention to it. So you want to have it, you want it to have a high TVL. And that just means the amount of money that's held in a pool so that it can be shadow puppeted onto the home chain. And when it does have a high TVL and it does have a high uptime and it has been in the wild for a long time, right? Like these all feed into each other kind of recursively. It becomes compelling to hat wearers, right? Like black hats and white hats, for example. And certainly possibly individuals in between, but primarily the two extremes. And if it has been in the wild for a very, very long time, while being compelling to hat wearers, I would say it satisfies the definition of battle tested. And there were a few projects right off the bat that did, and we ended up choosing them, but that would make the story really boring. While covering battle tested, I have covered the parameters and the limit to some extent, right? Like if it has 100% uptime, but it has no money on it, it's not compelling, et cetera, et cetera. There are some bridges that are not battle tested, and well, there are some problems with them. We're not going to get into them. I will mention one of them. I'm not going to go into the details, but this was my summary. And, this would be some of the content that I would offload onto, let's say, a Bridge Bytes episode, for example. In a nutshell, one of the programmers made an assumption about some of the code that they used, and their assumption was wrong, and hey, free money. But luckily it was disclosed by a hat wearer who happened to be wearing a white hat in this case. So where can you find Bridge Bytes stuff? On Quant Gang. I'll probably announce it on my Twitter if I go on. Yeah, you'll know, you'll find it. How did we... So we know what battle tested means, but it's really not enough, right? Like, you have to understand the bridge at a protocol level, at a code level, because there could be some good projects out there that have like moderate TVL, that aren't in the top 10 TVL or something like that, but that are built on top of a really good protocol that have a bunch of architectural properties that would make them a very, very good bridge. And so now we're going to break down what some of those properties would be, and at the very least, at a high level, you'll know what properties are important to identify whether a bridge is bad. So it's better to know what not to do than what to do sometimes. So we've covered partially the 0 to 1 process. I'm going to discuss some of the steps that I took to conduct research to generate this architectural constraint, this set of architectural constraints. Started with academic papers just on the topic. So this included survey papers, and then from there, I went a little bit deeper. Sorry, from there, I went a little bit. I'm just going to have a little bit of water, sadly. Sorry to interrupt the flow of the presentation. So I went through some survey papers. I followed references. And maybe at another time you'll want to pause and look at what Ralph is searching on YouTube. I went through a lot of white papers, varying percentages of those white papers, certainly, but I did a quick tally while making my slides of how many files were in a certain folder, in the white paper folder of the research that I've done. And there were a lot, over 100. So there were fewer links to docs, right? Because we can kind of view from the left to the right as a filtering mechanism. You understand the ideas in the space. You get the minimal effective knowledge, which I'll discuss a little bit later on this slide. And then you start looking at things with your minimal effective knowledge. Some of those things are less useful than others. I would also go to chat rooms once I found interesting projects. You can get an idea about the effectiveness of an implementation by looking at how often people who use a protocol will complain, right? So at a very high, like, general level, if the protocol claims to for instance, be atomic, and people are speaking in a way or signaling in a way where it would lead you to believe that a protocol is not atomic, then it's kind of a red flag. And the number of times that this occurs usually implies that it's not like a random user who's just being dumb, but rather like a kind of problem with the system that has been created. And so, right, and so we see this emerge in chat rooms. So there are some projects with relatively high TVL. They're not that popular, but they do have relatively high TVL. They make certain claims, and their chat rooms would indicate otherwise. And certainly, of course, chats with their devs, if you ask pointed questions about their protocols, their answers will tell you things. And then if those answers are insufficient, then you dive into the code. Certainly you could go code first, and you can find some problems immediately at a code first level. We're not going to get into what some of those look like, but often in the very first line of code, a project will not even fix their compiler version, and that's just like a rookie mistake. So there's tons of other stuff that's wrong in their project. So once you've done the research, and generally I'd say you could generate the decision criteria from the academic papers alone. And you can refine your decision criteria, again, in sort of a way that feeds back into the criteria you've seen before, recursively, as based on what you see. So once you define or generate your decision criteria, I'm so sorry for these slides switching back and forth. There's nothing I can do. Then you want to find an appropriate representation of both the decision criteria and the decisions that you've made, and a really quick way to check with some kind of sentiment analysis. So this spreadsheet ended up being really big. It's actually spread out across 2 spreadsheets. I think it's over 120 projects now. They did not, these were not the droids that we were looking for. Let's just say that. What was really impressive during the generation phase of this spreadsheet was actually the pipeline from community members to the bridge room, where we would look at the projects and add data to the spreadsheet. And there were suggestions coming in from tons of different chat rooms. It was really nice to see. So nice job, everyone. So now we'll get into some of the high level architectural constraints of what makes a bridge good. So without some of these being optimally initialized, let's say, then a bridge is not good. So one of the big ones is atomicity, which is you can view it as a conceptual portmanteau. Even the word itself is not a portmanteau, but it's a composition of these 2 concepts called liveness and safety. Really simple way to think of what liveness is there's good states, and if a protocol we say that a protocol satisfies the liveness property if the protocol can only reach good states, and necessarily will reach good states. And we say that, and similarly for safety, if a protocol can reach a bad state, then it fails safety. So, and so it's like, okay, well, that's really hard to understand. I have no idea what you're talking about, but this cat picture looks cute. So liveness, you can think of liveness as, is my money going to be safe? Like, if I send it, will it actually get sent? Yes, awesome. Then a protocol is live. And safety, like, can the protocol print free money? And if it can, then it fails safety. So, really simple way. And sometimes determining whether a protocol is atomic is not easy. And in fact, sometimes it looks like it is, and the chat room thing really kind of helps. And usually this will signal that there's an issue with the code itself. So you can just kind of toss it away, even though it looks good. So then there's this notion of trustlessness. You can think of this as minimizing your counterparty risk. There's various ways. If you're depending on architectures, the signature schemes can change. The trusted relayers might have different schemes for setting up their signatures. There are crypto-economic consequences sometimes. However, those are like arguably effective. A bridging project will create its own token, and then the crypto-economic consequences are in the form of the new token. So like, okay, if the bridge project is great and like sustainable and like targeted at being like a long-term thing, then that's awesome. But if it's not, then it's like, okay, cool story, bro. So the ideal stuff right now for minimizing counterparty risk, at a high level, it can be thought of as repayment protocols. So an example of these are atomic cross swaps via hash time lock contracts. Sadly, they're mostly off the table for the very, very first day of Pulse Chain, because they're not ideal for minting. And on the first day of Pulse Chain, the number of individuals who want to put money into the chain is much larger than the number of individuals who want to take money out. And this can be thought of, and so you can create a ratio of these two things, and that can be thought of as the bidirectionality ratio, and it's definitely not one on day zero. So an HTLC solution would really, really, really suck, and it would almost be like not having a bridge at all. So it looks like I made a note for myself to talk about admin keys possibly on the next slide, or once this kind of slide motif is over, the next slide motif will likely talk about it. So I'll wait to talk about it until then. Nope, it's literally right here. Awesome. So for the community bridge solution, I actually talked about this maybe for 35 minutes, 40 minutes on an episode of Bridge Bytes, which I'll link at the end of this talk, about why our solution needed admin keys, and what we did to mitigate the risk of admin keys maximally, and why we still had to leave one. And the reason, one of the reasons, or a really simple example of the reason, can be just thought of by considering validators. So one of the admin keys controls the list of validators. And if your validators start sucking, or if they misbehave, you kind of want to change them, right? So if you don't have a way to change them, then you're not going to have a good time. I really need to include that South Park slide. but at a high level, it really comes down to your system having static elements and dynamic elements, and the admin key controls the dynamic elements because let's call it the temperament of your validators may change, right? So it's a dynamic component of the system, and you want to be able to provide a good product or service if a component of your service starts sucking. Okay, great. So now decentralization was another architectural constraint. This can be thought of, if you're going with a set of relayers that have to sign, you can think of it as the ability to extend your set of relayers. Right, you can reach decentralization that way, but just having a lot of different people involved. It's a simplification, obviously. There's a couple architectures that are being generated in the near future, like decentralized Oracle networks and witness networks, and but those sadly do not have zero counterparty risk, right? Like, you're still relying on those networks, and certainly they are much better than older oracles, but not as great still. So another constraint was EVM compatibility, right? Like, there are certain bridges on other networks, like the Polkadot network. I know there are bridges from Ethereum to Polkadot, but there are bridges between parachains that just, like, they don't work on Ethereum, so you can't use them. Layers, that's more of like creature comfort, I guess you could think of it that way, and a scalability thing. Layer 1 solutions, slightly more expensive, but hey, it's sort of like a bonus. And yeah, I guess if you're considering the layer stuff, you can consider what class of you can consider what proof system, let's say, they're using. And then finally, the code itself, and certainly code has its own, right? Like, good code has its own set of constraints, let's say, in order to satisfy the definition of good code. Back to the battle-tested thing. Well, actually, no, I don't think audited was technically part of battle-tested, but audited is important. You want audited and battle-tested, certainly. So you want your code to be audited. Ideally, like, the code itself was generated using, like, good software processes, which usually catch a lot of bugs. On top of that, you want your code, you want to be able to see their code, right? So, I mean, it's not hard to see on the blockchain, but still. And you want the code to not have a lot of attack vectors, right? So you want to look at where it's communicating with what and where an attacker could communicate with it. This kind of stuff is usually solved in the formal specification part of the process, but sometimes it's not. And so, yeah, and certainly other features like modularity are great. The function, so at a functional level, our bridge, the community bridge, has an extension over top of, like, an arbitrary message bridge, right? And both of those two components themselves are modularized. So modularity is good. You can you can look carefully at smaller pieces. I won't get into it. That's kind of outside of the scope. This component was really accessory to the motif of this slide. Anyways, I'll continue. So this horizon has been here for a while, and it's really just a representation of a bright future when it comes to bridging. There's some good academic solutions. Some of this stuff will need to be invented, and certainly while you invent, you will test it, and And yeah, so the future looks bright, but it's a ways away. So I won't really talk about some of the cool stuff, because if I do, it'll become a community expectation, and it's too far away. So a summary, a quick statement of exactly what the community bridge looks like. We're using, as I mentioned earlier, code that was audited by Chain Security. It's a POA token bridge specifically. We've initialized it to arbitrary message mode. We're using the OmniBridge extension, and we started with the Omni UI, tweaking the UI a little bit. The UI wasn't audited to begin with, so it's like really simple stuff, right? You open an RPC channel and you show stuff, so it's not hard. And as I mentioned on that weird kind of like interloper slide, we've introduced multisig. Actually, I didn't mention this specifically, but multisig is introduced as well, for control over the dynamic element. So it's not just one person with an admin key, it's a set of individuals. And we've revoked control over the static elements of the system using like known and like widely accepted tools like Ownable by OpenZeppelin. So great, cool. So this is a summary slide. Just a reminder of the one takeaway that I really hope everyone takes away. It's probably a better idea if you use a community bridge. It's not advice. It's just like, I would use it. So that's that. Next I'm going to focus on the relationship between vampire attacks and bridges. Before I do, I'll tell you what we've covered so far. As I promised, you know about some of my recent activities in the community. I've promised you that you'll be exposed to the notion of bridging, right? A very simple explanation, starting with a foreign chain, a home chain, contracts on them, and the human in between, right? And exactly how to transition from a website to sending your tokens, and you know, if you want to get a kind of a technical understanding via analogy, you can think of it as finger puppets. Sorry, not finger puppets, as shadow puppets on a wall. So you might run into problems when it comes to network effects if you use some like really obscure random bridge. And I probably have heard of it, but you know, maybe there's going to be a thing like not legal advice, not financial advice, not bridge advice, etc. So I'm leaving that to you. You know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a community bridge. So that's that. And you know that liquidity pools are more powerful when many people use them. And you know that each different kind of bridge produces a slightly different kind of token that cannot be put in the same liquidity pool. So that's that. You've witnessed some constraints, some kind of like 0 to 1 knowledge constraints for how to figure out what a good bridge is, or at the very least what a bad bridge is, and what a good bridge is not. And you know, my story will hopefully empower you. Just kind of like some random pleb showed up, was helpful. So you can do that too. Just make sure you're being helpful along the way. You know exactly which code we're using. I am going to link it at the end of the talk. And now what's left for our conversation, what I promise that you'll know by the end of our conversation is that you'll be more formally exposed to what a vampire attack is, and why you can think of Crypto Dracula as having 3 fangs rather than 2. You'll be introduced to some vampire attack patterns, and you'll get a sneak peek at some of the stuff that I'm going to offload from this presentation to some Bridge Bytes and Vampire Bytes episodes on QuantKang, which is where I've been doing most of my episodes. And finally, links to all the stuff I talked about. So here comes the vampire attack section. You'll notice the vampire Pepe has 3 candles coming out of its mouth representing the 3 fangs. So fun way to remember. And yeah. All right. So we're going to cover some basic definitions, some patterns. Within the basic definition category, we're going to be considering games. We're going to take a really constrained look. We're going to take a look at some really constrained definitions of games. So we're going to consider zero-sum games. Has nothing to do with 0 + 0. It's just a meme that I created. And cooperative games. And they're, in a weird way, this meme is kind of appropriate. Ethereum, I actually have a section about what they're doing to themselves. Anyways, I'll discuss that. I should have put Richard Hart's face on the cat. We're going to talk about fairy tales, and you might be surprised that they're going to be fairy tales about vampires. And we will touch on why Crypto Dracula has 3 fangs and what those fangs are. Additionally, in the pattern section of the vampire attack category, we are going to consider common patterns and uncommon patterns. So some common patterns, which you might be surprised to know, are hex, and we'll discuss why. We'll talk about other stuff. We're going to use Richard Hart's idea of a risk diode for that. And in the uncommon pattern section, we're going to talk about the pulse chain copy. Hopefully I'll mention this on the Minsky slide, but I might not. And if I forget to, then it's kind of obvious. You just make a copy of the coins, but it's a unique and powerful idea, and I'll hopefully touch on this. Then there's also vampire attacks that can be performed on data, and the bridge could have utility on this, and I'll touch on why. And, the pulse chain AMM is a really uncommon and interesting vampire attack as well. So much cool stuff going on. And right, we'll just offload a lot of the cool stuff onto other segments. So for the basic definitions section, we'll start with games. So the first kind of game is a zero-sum game. At a high level, it's a competition, and it's a competition for for resources, either a particular resource or many resources. And naturally, competitions are between entities of some sort. And in a zero-sum game specifically, the definition that we're going to use for it, there's many definitions, so just leave me alone, please. I'm aware. The definition we're going to use is where all but one entity in the game does not lose. So for a cooperative game, the pattern is actually very simple. We literally just tweak a few tiny things. So the stuff that just popped up on the screen, so the transition between this slide and this slide, that all stays the same as a zero-sum game, and the empty black spaces are the only thing that changes. So literally the label for the game, and it's cooperation, and what makes it different from competition is that at most 0 participants lose, right? So the language might be a little bit weird here, this at most 0 thing, but generally the players are better off by playing the game and by cooperating. So now we're going to talk about a vampire fairy tale. Leo lost one of his teeth, apparently. whatever. And it's competition, but the resource in question is blood, and it's competition between humans and vampires, and where all but one lose. So the Vampire Fairy Tale is actually a zero-sum game. And this is going to be relevant in our considerations of what it means to win a game like this. Sometimes vampires could win too hard, right? And if the vampires win so hard that there's no humans left, eventually it means that there's not going to be any vampires left. So that's something really important to keep in mind when we're thinking about Ethereum. I see people on Twitter offering $10,000 or so for an individual to buy an NFT. Like, that's how broken it is. You have to pay people to buy NFTs and they still refuse. Like, that's crazy. So can we trust vampires to self-regulate? You know, sometimes there are fairy tales about like councils of vampires who understand that if they win too hard, it's going to be a problem for them. And sometimes they don't understand this. So we want to look at crypto now as a competition, again, as a game, right? We can really view it as a game. The parameters basically just change slightly. We notice that all but one lose. So this is the same pattern as a competition. So it's a zero-sum kind of idea. But to consider like who the entities are in the if we view crypto as a zero-sum game, right? Like in this particular examination, we are making the assumption that crypto is a zero-sum game. I would say that it's not, but let's suppose that it is temporarily. So the kinds of entities that are in this space would be contracts, protocols, or networks, right? So the Ethereum network versus Pulse Chain, Hex contract versus other contract, one protocol versus another protocol. So those would be the entities that would fall into the between category. And now we're going to consider the resource, and this is what Dracula is looking for. So one of the resources in the crypto game is humans, or users, right? As we defined humans earlier, that includes devs as well. Devs are a resource that are not carefully considered in some of the decisions that I've seen certain networks make. And we will get into that. An additional resource are coins and actions. So if you have the humans but you don't have the coins, well, your price is zero until you do something with those humans. If you have the coins but not the humans, well, you could say your price is irrelevant since nobody's using the coins, and maybe they have a price, but if nobody's selling them, they don't. Anyways, and then actions. So the ideal scenario is you have humans, including devs, performing actions on the coins, either generating the coins in the dev case or spending the coins, or behaving in such a way that the price changes either up or down with the coins. And so that's what we're talking about when it comes to Dracula having three fangs. And this is really the set of resources that are important in games that sometimes are zero-sum when it comes to vampire attacks in crypto. And as I mentioned in the uncommon pattern section, there's a fourth resource, which is data. You can view coins as data, but there's non-coin data as well. So we want to ask ourselves like whether Ethereum is winning pathologically right now. And I believe I have a tongue-in-cheek proof upcoming. But we'll consider one sort of feedback loop first. So the fees are so high that they're driving away users, which drives away devs, driving away development, driving away utility, and ultimately driving away users, because the fees have been driving away users because the fees have reduced the utility. So it's this kind of you can think of it as like a virtuous cycle of some sort. Terminology doesn't matter. Feedback loop is sufficient. And what this means is that it's becoming a store of value only, which is inconsistent with some of their founding principles. So this little guy, the chief of the vampires, are possibly not, right? Like, I don't know if we can trust him to self-regulate, like in some of the fairy tales where councils of vampires self-regulate. Perhaps the greed is too high. Perhaps the reward from the resource is too compelling. And it might be so compelling that it harms the entire space, right? Like, as I mentioned earlier, there are people turning down 10K for right, like free 10K from like a reputable person, and yeah, it's literally getting insane. So this note I'm just gonna disregard for the moment. I address this later. So here's my my hand wavy tongue-in-cheek proof. So we could argue that Ethereum has a pathological abundance of resources that matter to Crypto Dracula. One proof is NFTs. The activity that we've seen concerning these. Another one is that the fees are too high for really any utility other than store of value, except for like a small set of individuals for whom the fees are essentially irrelevant due to the sizes of the transactions that they're making. I want to take a different view of what of what Pulse Chain is doing, and what Richard Hart is promoting that Pulse Chain is doing, which is that, yes, I would say like we are vampire attacking Ethereum, but for their own good, right? Like, we're almost kind of like a group of vampires that have realized that the people in charge are corrupt. They're buying too many weird bags and purple gloves, and they need to be stopped. So the pattern is the same. It's a cooperative game, and it's a cooperative game between Ethereum and Pulse. And Ethereum, I believe, will actually be better off, and both will win, for the simple reason that this feedback loop here with negative consequences will have its negative consequences attenuated. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, actually. So the feedback loop to which I'm referring is that fees drive away users, drive away devs, drive away development, drives away utility. That's the feedback loop. So I think we're going to enhance Ethereum's utility. We might see its utility appear for specific cases only, and Pulse Chain will capture utility for other cases, and that's actually fine, and great. If my earlier proof is not convincing, I'm not, like, it wasn't actually a proof, like that was a joke. I'm going to provide another proof, but this is also a joke proof, but it's a relatively compelling and convincing argument to demonstrate, without getting into like differential equations about, I'm not even going to finish that sentence, to demonstrate that this is a cooperative event, even if the intentions might have been different, even if beliefs about the intentions are different. I'm convinced, and hopefully you will be closer to being convinced at the end of this slide motif, that it is a cooperative game that we're playing with Ethereum right now. So to be convinced, we're gonna just briefly touch on this idea of a difference engine. I refer if you just Google difference engine, you're not going to get what I'm talking about. I'm referring to a Minskian difference engine. You can find it talked about in his book, The Society of Mind. It's a really simple idea. The machine tries to make the difference between where you are and where you want to be smaller with every step. Sometimes it takes a small step to do that. Sometimes it takes a big step. And we're going to consider what's happening through the let's refer to it to the game being played by Pulse and Ethereum through the lens of a Minskian difference engine. And we're also going to consider other projects and what they're doing. And then by considering both cases, so where one case is Pulse and the other case is some other projects, you will start to see why I think our efforts are cooperative, and you will start to see what non-cooperative, by viewing what non-cooperative efforts look like. So if we view our current state as being on Ethereum, in order to get to our goal state, which is Pulse Chain, we're really going to have to just consider the changes we need to make to get there. And, a hyper simplistic consideration of this is what the user has to do. They have to click. Perhaps I'm being a little facetious, but it's not much harder than this, right? Like you click one setting in your MetaMask, you're good, right? You set up the RPC. You can watch like a 10-second video to do this. It's not hard. And then devs have to make some trivial changes as well. But it's much easier for them, right? They don't have to go through deployment stages or anything like that. It's much, much easier. If the devs are good, it's really like relatively trivial stuff that they have to take care of. And then they're working on Pulse now. So that's not a lot of effort. But let's look at what some of the other projects force people to do. So on Pulse, compared to Ethereum, keys are the same, right? Your wallets are basically the same. Programming languages are the same. You also get your coins because the state is copied. The things that are different, your RPC settings, some trivial dev stuff. On other chains, like I'm not even kidding, they changed everything. Like your addresses look different. You have to use a completely different wallet. The programming languages are different. It's all different. The state is completely different. The bridging architectures are different. They changed the way that like it's all different. And the consequences of it being so different are that you lose mind share, right? Like, because devs have to commit to learning new languages, which makes them less familiar with older languages and makes them reluctant to switch. It changes user familiarity as well. Like so those projects, which I'm not going to name, those are examples of zero-sum games being played with Ethereum. Like they're trying to create a business moat for themselves. I get it. Okay, fine. But that's a zero-sum kind of thing. So, yeah. So you'll probably hear a lot of people fighting this action that the Pulse chain is doing, but we're basically setting up a McDonald's across the street, and guess what? That's actually a real thing in real life. And it turns out that often those McDonald's will share employees, they'll share resources. If they're out of barbecue sauce, which, by the way, if you had bought barbecue sauce from McDonald's 10 years ago and held, it went up 3.5x. And McDonald's went up slightly less than 3.5x. But that's irrelevant for now, but that's just something funny to consider. So, I don't think Pulse Chain is an evil thing. It's a cool thing, and I think it's a useful and helpful thing. So, so we've covered games. Next looks like so we've actually covered basic definitions, I suppose, the set of definitions I wanted to cover. And next we're moving on to patterns. As I said, we'll look at common, uncommon patterns. We've got hex. We have other weird stuff that I will just briefly mention how it actually. If you know, like, even a little bit of graph theory, some of that stuff just kind of reduces to hex. So, anyways, the pulse chain copy, I think this is where I mentioned that I should talk about it a little bit more. I think if we consider it through the lens of a Minsky difference engine, you get a copy. You like, the change is you're changing your RPC settings. Sorry, I got a little pop up. The change is that you're changing your RPC settings from a user point of view. So, like, you have your coins. You don't even have to use a bridge to get across. That's like a very small difference. That's kind of like a good thing in the through the lens that we're viewing these activities. The bridge kill a teaser, and then offloading some stuff to Quackgang and Bridge Bytes and Vampire Bytes. So we'll start with a known vampire attack against low traditional finance yields, just wastes of time that make you feel like you're accomplishing something, but you're not. You're just giving yourself a job. Criminal inflation that's occurring, etc., and certainly our lettuce hands. So it's not supposed to be your, it's supposed to be our. Don't hate me, please. And surprise, surprise, it's hex. And so hex is winning a zero-sum game against these entities, right? Like, we have the stuff that Crypto Dracula cares about. We have humans, coins, and actions. But the funny thing is, if you take the humans and the coins, then what the user's actions are don't matter. Like, they can just go out and live their lives. Like, they'll have time to sit here and watch a presentation. They'll have time to make a presentation, right? You could, or, like, you just go spend time with your kids. That's great. That's awesome. So, and it, like a traditional zero-sum game, it's a competition between entities. And so I've mentioned our pleb lettuce hands earlier, and it's between hex, where hex is going to win. So I've changed like some of the defining parameters, but whatever. It's to make a point, really. So don't hate me. And so at like a somewhat high, at like a medium level of technicality, let's say, hex is really simple. You start off unstaked, you stake it, you wait, you get more hex. Sometimes, like, if you behave in a way where you deserve penalties, you get less, and other times you get more. So there you go. Maybe this is too complicated. Maybe a simpler way is to just list what goes on. And what you need to do to get hex. You get it, you stake it, you get more, and you just keep doing it. And this is usually where we get attacked, right? It's like, oh, so you never sell. Like, obviously you're going to sell at some point, but hex is important for getting more hex, and then at some point you'll sell. So I want everyone to keep in mind this little loopy thing, because the next slide motif is going to be full of loops, and I'm going to mention the concept of meta nodes and how you can condense loops. I didn't do the condensation, but with just knowing the idea, you'll kind of be able to see that there's a lot of accessory behavior that wastes your time and that adds inefficiencies like fees that you don't need to do to get, like, actually, in most cases, better results. So, anyways, we're heading there now. And I can't remember what this note is about, but that's a good thing to know. Sorry. So now we're gonna look at some vampire attack patterns that help a chain, like the pulse chain itself, do better. We've covered some of them, like making a copy of coins. But a lot of these patterns kind of fall into the category of DeFi for degens. I'm going to use Richard Hart's risk diode notion here. So, like, we're not going to share any names. But I am going to poke fun at the how ridiculous some of these patterns are getting. And then when you understand the meta node concept, you'll kind of laugh at how amazing Hex actually is. And certainly to make these DeFi for degen patterns useful, there are devs. They know what they're doing, but they're going to do it anyway, and more fees, I guess. In this kind of like degen sort of this like never-ending cycle of degen stuff, degen behavior. There's also people who broadcast to degens about like degen opportunities, and those people tend to funnel into a chain. So it has its utility, but it's not as good as Hex. So this is an example of a common pattern. I'm not kidding. To get this set up, you probably have to spend like half a day. You have to spend a lot of gas. And really what you're doing is kind of mimicking leverage trading. But you're actually also just exposing yourself to some vulnerabilities. Like with each new like little animal that you have to deal with, or like group of little animals, you're exposing yourself to like all the attack vectors associated with each one of them. Like they're not good. Like most of them suck. Most of them get hacked a few months after they come out. Like it's not worth it. And with each one you visit, right, your risks, the inefficiencies, they all multiply. So in some cases, it's worth it for like a little while, and then awesome. Maybe you didn't get hacked. Cool story, bro. Ultimately, it's just Hex with extra steps, and I'll demonstrate why that's the case by discussing meta nodes. So if you look at the panda in the center and you look at the duck, I'm still not sure if you can see my cursor. There's actually two ducks. There's one duck between a little pig and a turtle, and then towards the right, there's just a duck on its own. There's one arrow towards the duck and then one arrow away from the duck. Now, if you wanted to simplify Hex even more, you would look at the circle and arrow diagram. You'd notice like an arrow from the unstaked state to the staked state and then back. You could just draw a box that says Hex and put a little loop on it that says time, and then just say the output of the box is more Hex, right? You can also do the same for this little loop here. And anywhere you see a loop to and from, you can do that. So you can condense a lot of these states into like one meta state. And eventually you'll see that there's maybe two or three boxes and like movement between them. And the movements all involve time and tracking, right? And that's if we're being generous. But to actually make this like Reed Goldberg machine work, as Richard has called it, you need to track everything. Like it just sucks. Like it's not worth it. Like go do something else. You have a productive asset in Hex. Like make use of that, and then do something awesome with your time. So I'm not here to promote Hex. I'm here to talk about bridges and vampire attacks. But like sometimes there's some things that are just so compelling that they tend to elicit comments from me. So, or I should say induce comments. So I maybe listen, whatever. Okay, so now we're gonna touch on. I believe this is my last or penultimate slide motif, which is really just a teaser about data vampirism. And the whole idea of data vampirism is really about vampirism over communication. So there's entities that are communicating, and they never really expected to have two versions of one of themselves. And our bridge has the ability to move arbitrary data between chains. So there could be some really interesting stuff that comes up as a consequence of that. So that's something to consider and to look forward to. Some other topics that we're going to consider on Vampire Bytes, or perhaps Bridge Bytes, are some manipulations of oracles and certain let's just call them formulas that oracles use, or the protocols use based on data that's given to them by oracles. And so we're going to talk about how to sometimes even manipulate oracles. And if there's lots of protocols that are using oracles, or if there's some protocols that are getting some of that manipulated data, then they're going to have a bad time. I really need to get that South Park meme. So that's going to be one of the topics. So probably stay away from Oracle stuff. That would be a good idea. Because it might be associated with an LV Swan event. So looks like this is my last slide motif. So I'll see you all spoon on Bridge Bytes, and I have a few concluding remarks to make, and that's the end of my talk. So as I said, by the end of this talk, I promise that you know about some of the stuff I've been doing in the community. What you'll be exposed to ideas, and the notion of bridging itself, related. So ideas related to bridging and the notion of bridging itself. You'll take away one thing, which is related to a behavior that I'm engaging in, which is using the community bridge. So that the liquidity pools of what we bridge can benefit from network effects, right? You've witnessed some of the important architectural constraints, right? So if a bridge doesn't satisfy these, then it's not a good bridge. Hopefully that'll be useful information for you going forward. Hopefully my story has empowered you. These really great ideas and sci-vibes that you can be really, really effective, and only know a small amount of stuff in a space, are very empowering. And there's lots of empowering ideas in there. So strongly recommend that you read that book. I'll admit I'm only on chapter 6, but so far so good. You'll know which code we're using. So I've provided links to repos at the end of the presentation. You'll know why. Well, you do know why what it means to say that Dracula has 3 fangs. And you're more formally exposed to the notion of vampire attacks now. You have a rough idea of what they are. We've skipped over some canonical examples of vampire attacks, but that's okay because you should be equipped to at least know what they mean now. You've seen some vampire attack patterns. You've witnessed me getting a little upset about how ridiculous some degenerate DeFi has gotten, and you'll get a sneak peek, and sorry, you have gotten a sneak peek at some of the Bridge Bites and Vampire episode and Vampire Bites episodes that'll show up in the future on Quant Gang, hopefully. Next, I'll give you the relevant links. And I'll just thank everyone involved one more time, and I'll conclude my talk. So, all the links are here. You can find links to the slides in here as well. My socials, bottom left corner. It's a mix of whimsical stuff and like stuff with high utility. And now for the thanks portion, and after I finish my thanks, I'm done. So, thank you to everyone in the community. Special thanks again to Maddie ALLin for organizing the talk. It's really a lot of work to get something like this put together, so please don't forget to thank Maddie. Of course, thank you again to Richard Hart for his wonderful designs, both a product and community level. Thank you to Dev Kyle for your mentorship in the space. And finally, thank you to all the Hexagons watching. I really appreciate you all kindly including me in your community, because without all of you, none of this would be possible. That's the end of my talk. Thank you all very much.